And back with you today, and I want to share something that probably should be one of my alarm affirmations because I write it so often in my journal. And that's this 3-word statement: I am supported. So why do I write that all the time? It's like I realize as I'm going through, and let me tell you, building a business is a journey as much as having spiritual, psychological, and financial growth is a journey. All of it's a journey, and you kind of sometimes lose sight that you're okay, that you really are supported. And that's why it keeps reappearing as a theme in my journal. And I want to talk to you about being supported today. And as you can imagine, what I'm going to say is it's all about your viewpoint. It's all about how you perceive things around you. Two people can go through the same situation. I can go through the same situation twice. And one way I will feel supported, and the other time I will not. And it all has to do with my perception of what's going on. So I'm going to bring you a very specific example of where I would say I was not supported. And only when I looked back, when I reflected on the situation, did I realize I was incredibly supported in all sorts of ways. So in this particular situation, which is kind of hard for me to talk about, I had just had probably the most horrific thing happen to me that has ever happened to me in my life. My first child died, and I felt lost and angry and eventually depressed. And during that entire period of time after her death until I got help, which was almost a year and a half later, I felt alone. I felt unsupported psychologically, financially, spiritually. I felt abandoned. And to make a very long story short, when I began to look back at that period of my life, and not at the end of that 18 months when I finally got help, but really a decade later, is when I started to see how amazingly supported that I was. You know, I was a young mom, not terribly young, but young enough, early 20s with an infant. And oddly enough, the apartment complex I was staying in, the month my daughter was born, they said, oh, you don't have to pay rent this month. The month my daughter passed away, not only did I not have to pay rent that month or the month after, they had me move so I could leave the apartment where my daughter died. And that was the most incredible thing when I look back at it that has ever happened to me. Because they didn't have to do that. They didn't need to show that kind of compassion. But they wanted to help me move to a different apartment in the complex. The workers there helped me move, helped me pack my stuff, move into a different apartment, everything. They didn't have to do that. Can you see how amazingly supported I was when I felt totally abandoned? I was being supported financially because I was really going through some stuff, obviously. I was being supported physically. I was being supported psychologically. I was really also being supported spiritually through that whole process. And that's just one of the things that happened during that period of time that I didn't even realize until a decade later, reflecting back on it. That kind of compassion that came from that group of people running the office or the owner, I don't know who. I don't even know who to thank anymore. So also during that time, I was working on my master's degree. And guess what? I didn't show up for classes for the first 6 weeks. So I did have one professor drop me, which only makes sense. But 2 others kept me. And when I appeared in class one day, like nothing had happened, I found out from the one professor he'd already dropped me, and I said, okay. And the other 2 had kept me, and I asked finally, why did you keep me? And one of those professors said, they were both in the same department, and she said, I read the newspaper, I saw your last name, and I saw the last name of a young child who passed. And I realized that might be your child. And I told my colleague, and we decided to keep you enrolled in case you showed up. And if you didn't, we would drop you at the last minute. Again, didn't need to do that. Made all the difference in the world to me. Because again, I was being supported, even though in that moment in my head, I felt alone and lost and quite simply crazy. So that was another way I realized a decade later how incredibly supported I was. And then there were friends, and there were family, and people who made concessions for all my crazy behavior. And even some things I still don't feel comfortable talking about that people talked me out of doing because they realized it wasn't really who I was. It was just that part of me that was lost and angry and confused. So sometimes you don't realize how incredibly supported you are until you reflect back on the situation. And I implore you not to take a decade to do that, but to do it now, to really take a step back, even if you're in the middle of a crazy storm in your life. Take a step back and look how incredibly supported you are. That I say, peace, joy, love to you.